This new year could publicly expose and detail the mounting legal troubles for President Trump. Incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, says that he is prepared to force Mueller's report on the Russia investigation to go public if the White House tries to block its release.
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. Now, there may be parts of the report that have to be redacted because they involve classified information or they involve grand jury material. This case is just too important to keep from the American people what it's really about.
Joining me now to discuss, Jim Schultz. He's former attorney for the Trump White House. Jim, thanks for taking the time on this Christmas Eve.
Thank you.
So first question, in your view, is there any compelling legal reason for the White House to block the public release of the special counsel's report?
Okay, so Schiff had it right in that, the report is going to go over to Congress, presumably. It doesn't have to, but presumably it's going to go over to Congress. I think it would be politically detrimental to this administration to hold it back for any reason from going over to Congress. Certainly there are reasons why portions of it will be redacted. Remember, this is a counterintelligence investigation. There are likely to be classified information. There's likely to be grand jury information there that will need to be kept secret. But that being said, I think a report will likely go over to Congress. I don't think the administration will try to stop that. One way they could is by way of executive privilege. Remember, the Mueller team reports to the Deputy Attorney General, reports to the Attorney General, and they're part of the executive branch of the administration. So executive privilege could be asserted in this case, but I just don't see it happening.
Let me ask you, because you bring up the acting attorney general. We learned a lot about Matt Whitaker just in the last week. We learned that DOJ ethics lawyers who are nonpartisan career professionals there recommended that he recuse himself from oversight of the Russia investigation because, in large part, because of his public comments criticizing the Russia investigation before he took that position. We also learned that the president scolded his acting attorney general for not reining in federal prosecutors here in New York for pursuing criminal charges against Michael Cohen that he actually pleaded guilty to because the president felt that made him look bad. Is that the way a president should treat his attorney general? And is that the way an attorney general is meant to operate, in your view?
Look, I don't believe that it's going to impact Whitaker's decision-making one way or the other on this. The fact that the president may have scolded him, what the president said to him. Apparently, the president did not give him any directive as it related to any of that. And I think that Whitaker's going to do the right thing and continue down the road he's gone down in terms of the way he's been conducting himself. And I don't believe it's going to have any impact.
You remember the reaction among Republicans to the famous tarmac meeting between President Clinton and then Attorney General Loretta Lynch in the midst of an investigation involving Hillary Clinton. Here you have, and we don't really know what happened in that discussion, but just the appearance was one that Republicans rightfully question and were very publicly critical. We know that the president reached out to his acting attorney general, complained about the independent actions as they're designed to be of federal prosecutors pursuing crimes. Why is there not a similar outrage from Republicans today for very similar kind of interference?
Again, this is the executive branch of government. Last time I checked, I don't think Bill Clinton was the president of the United States at the time he was having that discussion with Loretta Lynch. So certainly that was a different situation. In this case, it's the executive branch of government.
Arguably worse, isn't it? Because the president, Bill Clinton,
the executive branch of
but it's arguably
government.
Worse, is it not?
Because the president,
because Trump is the president today. He's not a former president. He's a president who appointed Whitaker, directly criticizing Whitaker for not keeping him shielded from an investigation that might hurt him. That arguably is more concerning.
The president should not be getting involved in these investigations.
Okay.
He should not be publicly scolding or privately scolding the attorney general in connection with these investigations. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Whitaker is going to do the right thing and do the right thing as the attorney general of the United States. I don't think it's going to have any impact.
Let me ask you
but
then.
There is a striking difference between a private citizen going in and having a discussion with Loretta Lynch if that discussion had something to do with the investigation of his wife.
Sure, understood. Although you could argue that a sitting president has more power over the attorney general he appointed, could you not, than a former president? I mean, the point. Listen, you've already made the point. You're saying it's not interference that the attorney general should listen to. I think I hear you correctly.
Correct.
Okay. Jim Schultz, wishing you and your family the best on the holidays. Thanks for taking some time out. I hope you don't get too much grief when you go home. Top Democrats in the House plan on ringing in the new year with subpoena power. Incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, already warning President Trump that he better allow the public release of the special counsel's report on the Russia investigation. But if the White House were to try to block its release, as the president's lawyers said that they might, Schiff says that he is prepared to force Mueller's report into the public eye.
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. Now, there may be parts of the report that have to be redacted because they involve classified information or they involve grand jury material. This case is just too important to keep from the American people what it's really about.
A lot of Republicans share that viewpoint. Joining me now to discuss, Sarah Murray, CNN political correspondent, and Paul Callan, CNN legal analyst. Sarah, just first to you, what's your latest reporting on the White House intentions regarding this report? Are they seriously exploring ways to block it?
Well, look, they've been pretty clear that they do not want to see this entire report made public, and I think there's good reason for that, Jim. I mean, we know sort of the view right now from the Justice Department is that they can't bring charges against a sitting president. So let's say Mueller comes up with a report that says, look, the president did a whole lot of things wrong when he was running this campaign. He made a lot of bad decisions. There were a lot of errors in judgment, not just for him, but the people around him. That's not something the White House is going to want out there. They're going to try to protect as much as possible under the scope of privilege. But I think the reality is that, and what Schiff is getting at is the American public has spent a long time sort of waiting, hearing drips and drabs of this. There's been a lot of money devoted to this. And I think, Democrats have a political reason to want that out there. But I think there are certainly many Americans who want to know what exactly Mueller has been up to this whole time.
Paul Callan, you hear Sarah there mention the idea of executive privilege, which is something that this administration, this president, likes to use liberally. I mean, is there legal justification for, if not blocking the whole report, redacting significant sections, just saying, hey, these were private conversations between the president, his advisors, et cetera?
Well, if the president was conferring with advisors and the consultations were regarding perfectly legal presidential actions, yes, executive privilege could apply. But if the consultations were part of a criminal conspiracy of some sort, then the privilege would not apply, and that would not be grounds to release. There are, however, other problems in addition to executive privilege, and that's the special counsel law itself. It's got two sections that deal with how the report, if a report comes, gets released. And I will tell you that in reading it carefully, the Attorney General has enormous power here to block disclosure to the Congress if he wants to. So I think what you're going to see is a battle between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and maybe even the Supreme Court getting involved in whether it gets released.
Just one more legal question, Paul. We learned what was really explosive news in a week of explosive news, that the president's acting attorney general was advised by DOJ ethics lawyers, career lawyers, to recuse himself from overseeing the Russia probe because of past and repeated.
Sources tell CNN President Trump is angered by federal prosecutors and venting to his acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker, at least twice in the last few weeks. They say the president is frustrated because those prosecutors reference the president's actions in crimes his former attorney, Michael Cohen, pled guilty to. Now, while the acting AG oversees those prosecutors, sources say Trump has not directed Whitaker to stop the investigators. So let's bring in former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst Elie Honig and former FBI senior intelligence advisor Phil Mudd. Gentlemen, good morning. Elie, let's start with you because this news, amid the big news we've got, hasn't got a lot of attention. But a lot of conservatives, for example, were furious that Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton. How does this compare with that?
This is a huge deal, and I think it's been underplayed a bit. Look, this is worse. Think about it. You have the President of the United States telling the acting Attorney General, keep the Southern District off my back, right? When Loretta Lynch, Bill Clinton, I think there were problems with that, but Bill Clinton at the time was the spouse of a candidate. He had no say or even indirect say over what Loretta Lynch did. And I think the President's message to Whitaker was quite clear. Right, which is, I'm furious that the Southern District named me in connection with the campaign finance. And saying that is really no different. When your boss tells you, I'm furious that X happened, it's the same thing as saying, don't let X happen again. And it gets back to the president's sort of fundamental misunderstanding about the Department of Justice. The U.S. Department of Justice does not exist to serve Donald J. Trump, the individual, or even the president of the United States. The Department of Justice serves the American people and justice. This is what got him in trouble in the first place, right? The meeting with Comey where he said, hey, go easy, lay off on Flynn. This is no different than that.
Could this connote obstruction?
I think it's one and the same. I think it's the exact same idea. The bar for obstruction of justice is really quite low. I don't know if people fully understand that. I've prosecuted obstruction of justice cases for an individual trying to get a witness to change one element of their story. Here you have somebody in power saying, get these guys away from me. So I don't see an argument against it being obstruction.
Which is fascinating. Phil, as you look at this, and I think it's interesting, too, that as you point out, Ellie, Bill Clinton meeting with Loretta Lynch, well, couldn't really have any influence. A lot of people would take issue with that and say, well, actually, we think there could have been influence. If nothing else, though, the optics of that were bad. It's tough to argue a counterpoint on that one. Even just from an optics perspective, Phil, even if someone is in fully agreement with Ellie that this could be obstruction of justice, it doesn't look good for the president.
Yeah, but I think he's playing checkers. He's not playing chess. Let's look at the optics of it. From the outside, on the surface, you'd say, wow, the acting attorney general is in the office with the president, must feel some pressure to intervene in the case. Well, let's take that one step forward and move out of checkers into chess. Let's say that before, last week, Whitaker thought he would pick up the phone and talk to the Southern District of New York just because he reviewed some of the elements of the case and said, I have a perspective I want to talk about. The president almost limited Whitaker's ability to interfere in the case now because regardless of the facts of the case, if Whitaker says something now, what are the optics going to look like? Well, you did that because the president teed you up in the Oval Office. I think the president vented thinking maybe he could pressure Whitaker. I think quite the opposite. Now he almost ties Whitaker's hands because Whitaker can't do anything without appearing to acting at the behest of the president's orders.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Allie, let me speak to you about one fascinating case, the so-called Mystery Mueller case. There is a company that seems to be under civil indictment that is fighting handing over some records, and Justice Roberts weighed in over the weekend to issue a stay, so they didn't have to. What do we know about this case, and why is it drawing so much speculation and attention?
So this is the mystery case, the mystery subpoena case, where there was all these sealed arguments happening in the D.C. federal courts. On Friday, we learned that the recipient of the subpoena was not an individual. Some were speculating maybe it's the president, maybe it's the vice president. Turns out it's a corporation that is in some part owned by a foreign state. Right, and so there's plenty of speculation about what that could be.
Who could fall into that category?
Yeah, I mean, look, the most likely category would be a foreign-owned and foreign-backed bank. We know the president has a long relationship with Deutsche Bank. I'm speculating, but if making a sort of reasonably educated guess, he's taken hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from them. They were recently raided. So if I had to guess, that would be my guess, but it would only be a guess. What we do know also is this company really, really does not want to turn over this information. It's fairly rare for a corporation to fight a subpoena like this. Usually if you're a corporation, you receive a subpoena, you may argue to limit it in some respect, but just say, no way, we want nothing to do with this. We're going to fight you in the district court, then we're going to fight you in the appeals court. They lost both of those, and then we're going to take it to the Supreme Court.
It makes you wonder what it is that they don't want to reveal. It really does.
It does.
Phil, I want to get your take on this. We heard from Adam Schiff over the weekend. Obviously, as everyone is waiting to know what Mueller has learned, there is some question about whether we will ever know. Adam Schiff tackling that. Take a listen.
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. Now, there may be parts of the report that have to be redacted because they involve classified information or they involve grand jury material. This case is just too important to keep from the American people what it's really about.
Phil, you think he's putting the cart before the horse here. Why?
Yeah, slow down here. Look, we have enough news in this town without worrying about what might happen a month down the road, 6 months down the road. It's appropriate to look at what Mueller is doing and say we ought to at least privately be concerned about whether this case will continue or whether somebody, including the incoming attorney general, will try to shut it down. But we don't even have a Mueller report yet. The case isn't even shut down yet. Can we deal with what we have now and try to stay cool in the midst of a crisis? One thing you learn in government, the hotter it gets in the kitchen, the cooler the cook gets. Let's not deal with what might happen. Let's just deal with today. That's what I'd argue.
Phil Mudd, Ellie Honig, good to see you both. Thank you. Supreme Court Justice Ruth